Monsanto was able to identify the gene in that bacterium, the Bt gene that was responsible for production of that protein. And they could use a process to insert that gene into a potato variety, one that growers were already familiar with. The beetle eats that leaf and gets that Bt protein inside it, and it disrupts its digestive system. So then that eventually kills the Colorado potato beetle. I came from the standpoint that technology and new improvements were a good thing for the potato industry. So I was very excited to see something that was kind of a quantum leap in technology for the industry be introduced.
The promise here was that you could diminish spraying. You might pay a little bit more for these potatoes, but since they generated their own pesticide, you could give up some of your sprayings. And this was very attractive to a lot of potato farmers.
We were really excited about it and thought that it was really going to take off.
In 1996, the new leaf potato began making its way into fast food chains and supermarkets. As time went by, millions of people were eating the genetically modified potatoes, but hardly any of them realized it, because the government had ruled the potatoes didn't need to be labeled.
I realized as I did my reporting, I'd eaten them already. I'd been in a McDonald's, I'd bought Frito-Lay chips, and the thing I learned that I hadn't been aware of, because we hadn't been told, is that we Americans had been eating these potatoes already for a couple of years.
The potato was the same nutritionally, had the same level of vitamins, things like that. It just had this one additional gene that codes for a protein that makes up less than 1/10 of 1% of the total protein in the plant. And the decision by the Food and Drug Administration was that unless it's substantially different, unless there's a new toxin, unless you've changed the nutrient profile, it does not need to be labeled.
Now, it seems to me that the potato never before produced this pesticide. So to say that potatoes producing pesticide are substantially equivalent to potatoes that don't seems to involve a certain suspension of disbelief.
In the late 1990s, as the new leaf was making inroads into the market, the issue of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, was arousing intense opposition all over the world.
We don't want no GMOs. Hey, hey, ho, ho.
I want to know what's going on in my body, my daughter's body, when they feed corn to us that's been genetically altered. They don't know. They can't tell you.
The Bt potato offers farmers reduced costs. It doesn't offer consumers anything. And so a lot of consumers, if they were given a choice, might say, well, it doesn't provide an advantage for me, and therefore, not knowing a whole lot about it, I might simply say no.
I do know McDonald's was getting a certain number of calls and letters asking them, is it true that you are serving genetically modified potatoes? This is a company, like many food companies, exquisitely sensitive to public opinion, and they probably saw a potential public relations disaster. They didn't want to, ruin Monsanto's business, but they very quietly said that after the following year, they would no longer be taking them. And with that, the new leaf potato was over. That was it.
In 2001, Monsanto stopped selling the new leaf potato. It had captured only about 5% of the market. Both McDonald's and Monsanto declined to be interviewed for this program.
I was very disappointed to see this whole dream just kind of be shut down over a relatively short period of time. It seemed to me to be a tragedy.
I don't think it was a tragedy. I think it was part of a very large debate about how our society ought to respond to the use of a radically new technology like genetic engineering in agriculture.
But since the demise of the Bt potato, Monsanto has been very successful selling other genetically engineered crops, like corn, soybeans, and cotton. Entomologist Bruce Tabashnik has been studying the Bt cotton crop in Arizona.
We're in a special situation in Arizona right now where about 98% of the cotton grown is Bt cotton. It's being used as part of a program to eradicate or at least greatly suppress pink bollworm.
The bollworm is as dangerous to the cotton crop as the Colorado beetle is to potatoes.
We have lots of damage inside the boll here. One or more caterpillars has been feeding on the seeds inside the boll, which is great for the insects, but not good for the plant or for the farmer.
Tabashnik has been investigating one of the major concerns about Bt crops: the degree to which insects evolve resistance to the bug-killing protein. Some of his work is partly funded by Monsanto, which is legally required to monitor Bt resistance. For years, organic farmers have controlled pests with a spray form of Bt. But now that Bt has been engineered into crops, exposing insects day in and day out, Tabashnik has found that the bugs are more likely to develop resistance.
In the decades of use of Bt sprays, there's only one insect that evolved resistance. On the other hand, after about a dozen years of Bt crops, we already have 3 examples of insects that have evolved resistance.
But Tabashnik still thinks genetically engineered crops do more to help the environment than to harm it.
I think that ultimately you can't be absolutely sure that no harm will come. But when you're using Bt crops, the benefits are reduced insecticide use. The risks are much more difficult to quantify and much more uncertain.
In my own mind, it seems like it makes sense that we could go to more genetically modified type plants that would allow us not to apply these chemicals on the plants, and they would have a natural resistance to these insects. It seems like a logical way to go for man, and I assume someday it will go there.
But for food crops like the potato, genetic engineering and chemical pesticides are not the only choices.
You know, as long as you're growing monocultures, you sort of have to choose between lots of pesticides to keep them going or genetically modified crops to keep them going. But if you're willing to abandon monoculture, there are other ways to do it.
Mike Heath, who grows potatoes in Idaho just 60 miles from the Crannies, is an organic farmer.
In a conventional system, you're trying to control. you're trying to control nature. We're trying to work with it as best we can.
While his neighbors devote most of their acreage to the russet Burbank, Heath is more of an equal opportunity grower.
We have 16 varieties altogether this year, so we're pretty diversified. As far as I'm concerned, that's our main strength, is our diversification.
Heath grows Norcotas, Red Norlands, All Blues, and Elbas. By planting lots of different varieties and controlling pests with natural enemies like ladybugs, he farms without using toxic chemicals.
The conventional farmers certainly know how to farm with chemicals. I myself, if I had to go back to that, I would quit.
Heath's labor costs are high. He doesn't cultivate as many acres or grow as much food as the Crannies. But since he spends next to nothing on pesticides and gets good prices for his organic potatoes in specialty markets, he usually earns more money per acre.
I used to be really pretty stupid, as far as my neighbors were concerned. Pretty silly. But I have a lot more respect now than I did 10, 15 years ago. They can see that I'm still in business, and we've got good markets, and we grow a good product, and I'm proud to be an organic farmer.
You know, there are other ways to skin a cat, and farmers are figuring it out. And they're figuring out how to grow food without pesticides. And the key insight that you find in all the creative farmers who have solved this problem is getting away from monoculture. The answer to the problems of monoculture is not new technologies, it's not Band-Aids, it's getting away from monoculture.